Recursion is a method that calls itself inside of its body. So the tendency is that it will loop back and forth until it reaches a certain condition that terminates itself. To give you an example on how to use recursion, let's open our Visual C# and write some recursive methods. To give you a clear example on how to write recursive methods, we will start by using a simple loop statement using for, and then we will convert this for statement into a method, and then turning this method into a recursive method. Okay, let's start. So what we will do, we are going to iterate from a given number down to 0. So I'm going to use loop statement, the for statement, and then let's start with 10, and then down to 0. Then we will create a console write line here for us to display the value of our I. So what we did here, inside of our main method, we created a for statement, and then inside of our for statement, we stated here that we are going to execute the console write line I 10 times. Okay, let's write here 10, and then let's write here 0. So it will display 10 down to 0. Before we run this application, let's fix this condition that we have written here. While I is greater than 0 or equals 0, then it will keep on displaying the value of I. So let's run the application now. So there you go. It shows up all the numbers starting from 10 down to 0. This is how our for statement works. Now let's try converting this for statement into a recursive method. So at the bottom, we will write here static. For the meantime, we will write a void static or static method, a method that will not return any value. Then we will name this decrement, and then we will give this a value of a parameter value of integer, and it will be called num. And then inside of this, we will write here num minus equals 1. And then before we subtract num with 1, let's write here the console, that right line, for us to display the value of our num. Then that's it. And then we will write here the condition that will terminate and make this method stop. So let's write here an if followed by the num, that if num is already 0, then it has to stop. Else it will display the num, but it will include a subtraction. From there, we will be able to see the value of our num as it loops back and call itself. Then lastly, we will write here decrement num, or we can remove this from here. Then let's write here decrement minus 1. Okay, so let's give this a try. I'm sorry, we forgot to call the name of the method. So let's comment this out, and then let's call the method just above our console read line. Let's call the method decrement. Then let's say 10. Okay, so let's give this a try. Okay, so there you go. It was able to display 10 down to 0. So the effect is just the same with the effect of our 4. So let's try giving this a number. Let's say 50. So it shows the number from 50 down to 0. Okay, so that's how a recursive method works. So you have to define the method and then state here when this method should stop. So it will stop if the num reaches 0, and then otherwise, so what should happen here, it should display the value of the num, and then decrementing the value of num by 1. So passing the num minus 1, meaning the value of num will be subtracted by 1, and then calling itself, it will loop back to the beginning of itself. The num here will decrement by 1. So if before the num is 50, then it becomes 49. Then it will execute this line again, and since 49 is not 0, it will jump here. So 49 minus 1, it will become 48, and 48 is not 0, it will jump here. Then it will continue on doing that until it reaches 0. When it reaches 0, that's the time that this method will stop. This time, let's try a different example. Instead of using a static void method, we will use a static method that will return a value. So let's comment this out, and then let's comment this out. And then on this part, this is where we are going to write our method that will return a value. But again, this method is a recursive method. Static int increment. We will write a method that will increment the value passed in the parameter variable, and then as it calls itself, it will keep on incrementing that value. Let's write here num. Let's give it a type of integer. Let's write here return num. It will return num if num is equals to 100, because what we want to do here, we will stop incrementing our variable when we reach 100. And then on this part, we will write here return increment num plus 1. So this is how we write a method that returns a value, but in a recursive way. Okay, to start using this method, just at the top of our console read line, we will write here and call our increment. So let's write here increment, passing the value of, let's say, 50. And then as it increments, we want to display what are the changes happening inside of our increment method. And in order for that to happen, we will write here console.writeLine, the value of our num, and then at the last part, we have to add another console here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this one. There you go. And then since this method will return a value, we have to make a way to catch that value. So let's write here int x equals to increment 50. So after calling the increment, it will return whatever the value of our num. And then that value will be placed inside of our x. But we will not do anything on the value of our x. So this is just for the sake of complying the requirements of a method that returns a value. So there should be always a way for us to catch that return value. That is why we are including here the x. Okay, so let's give this a try. Okay, so it gives us the value, the numbers from 50 down to 100. Okay, so this time let's change 50 to a different number. Let's say we want to change the numbers between 20 to 100. So it will pass the 20 here on our parameter variable num, then it will keep on incrementing that 20 until it reaches 100. When our num reaches 100, then that's the time that it will return the final number. Then it will stop right there. Okay, so let's give this a try. Okay, so there you have it. We have here numbers from 20 down to 100. So there you go. So that's how you write a recursive method using a method that returns a value and a method that does not return any value. So that's all for this lecture, and then see you in the next videos.